Ethan Whitmore slid the diamond ring onto Vanessa Cole's finger right there in the middle of Meridian Steakhouse, the same restaurant where he'd proposed to Clara 7 years ago, and then had the nerve to pull out his phone and post it to Instagram with the caption, "When you finally stop settling and choose happiness." Clara's number was still in his contacts. He made sure the post was public, made sure their mutual friends could see it, made sure the world knew he had moved on, upgraded, and left her behind. What he did not know, what he could not possibly have calculated, was who was sitting across from Clara Whitmore at that exact moment. If this story already has your heart racing, you're in the right place. Hit that subscribe button so you never miss what comes next. Stories like this one land here every week. Drop a like and tell me in the comments, what city or country are you watching from? I want to see exactly how far this story has traveled. Clara Whitmore had not planned on falling in love again. That was the honest truth, and she would have told anyone who asked, not with bitterness, not with the performance of a woman pretending to be fine, but with the quiet certainty of someone who had spent 8 months rebuilding her life from the ground up and decided, somewhere in the middle of all that wreckage, that love was not something she was willing to risk again. Not yet. Maybe not ever. But life had other ideas, and life, as Clara had learned the hard way, was rarely interested in what she had planned. She had met Daniel Hargrove by accident, the only honest way to meet someone, in her experience. It was a Tuesday afternoon in late October, and she was sitting in the waiting room of Dr. Patricia Holt's office, a maternal-fetal specialist on the 4th floor of Crestview Medical Center, where she had been bringing her twins for their 6-month checkups since they came home from the NICU. Noah and Lily were asleep in their double stroller, which Clara had angled into the corner so the wheels didn't block the aisle. And she was eating a granola bar because she had forgotten to eat lunch, and her hands were shaking from the coffee she'd had on an empty stomach. Daniel had been sitting 2 chairs away, reading something on his phone with the focused look of a man who was used to processing information quickly. He was tall even sitting down. She noticed that first with the kind of casual, unhurried posture that suggested he had nowhere more important to be. His suit was dark navy, no tie, the collar open. He looked like someone who had long since stopped needing to prove anything to anyone. He glanced up when Lily made a small noise in her sleep, and Clara tensed automatically, that particular reflex of every mother who has spent weeks in a neonatal intensive care unit, where every sound either means everything is fine or nothing is fine at all. "They okay?" he asked. Not intrusive, just present. "They're fine," Clara said, relaxing. She does that, makes noises in her sleep. Her brother sleeps like a stone, and she sounds like a small weather system. He smiled at that, and it wasn't the practiced smile of someone networking. It was just a real smile. How old? 6 months. Corrected age, 5. They were early. They look strong now. "They are," she said, and she meant it in a way that still made her chest tight, because she remembered when strong was not a word anyone was using about Lily. And there had been nights in the hospital when Clara had sat in a vinyl chair next to an incubator and bargained with herself in the dark, not with anything else, just with herself, with the part of her that still believed in outcomes she could control. She will be fine. She has to be fine. I will make her fine by sheer force of wanting it enough. Lily had pulled through on her own terms, not Clara's, which was probably the first and most important lesson of motherhood. She and Daniel had talked for 40 minutes while they waited. She learned that he was there with his younger sister, who was pregnant with her first child and had a complicated situation her doctor was monitoring. He learned that Clara worked in product development for a mid-sized packaging company downtown and had recently returned from maternity leave. Neither of them said very much about their personal lives, not because they were hiding anything, but because it hadn't come up naturally, and neither of them seemed inclined to force it. When the nurse called his sister's name, he stood up and said, "It was good to talk to you, Clara." He said her name like he'd been practicing it, which was strange, because she hadn't introduced herself. She must have, she just couldn't remember doing it. He left, and she thought that was a good conversation. And then she thought about the twins' iron levels and whether she needed to stop at the pharmacy before picking up Maya's dry cleaning, and she forgot about him. He found her again 3 weeks later, in the lobby of the same building, waiting for the elevator. "The twins," he said. "How are they?" She turned, and it took her a second. Then, "Good." Lily gained another half-pound. "The pediatrician is very pleased with herself. Tell her to pass some of that credit to Lily." Clara laughed. It surprised her, not a polite laugh, but a real one, The kind that comes from somewhere you didn't expect. I'll do that. They rode the elevator up together. He got off on the 3rd floor. She got off on the 4th. The doors closed between them, and she stood there for a moment in the hallway thinking, I don't even know his last name. The 3rd time she saw him, he was already looking for her. She was at a coffee shop 2 blocks from her office, a narrow place called Birdwing, that made excellent cortados and had tables small enough to force you to sit close to strangers, which Clara usually hated but had come to accept, and she was trying to draft an email to her direct manager about the Kellerman account when someone set a cup of tea on her table and sat down across from her. Is this aggressive? He said. This might be aggressive. It's a little aggressive, she agreed. I can leave. You already sat down. He stayed. His name was Daniel Hargrove. He was 43. His sister's pregnancy was going well. He ran a private equity firm headquartered in Chicago with offices in New York and Seattle, but he had spent the past 4 months in Jackson setting up a regional investment portfolio and would be here, roughly, for another 8 months. He told her these things without preamble, as if he was answering questions she hadn't asked yet, as if he already knew she would ask them eventually and was just getting the logistics out of the way. You looked me up, she said. I asked around, he said, which was different, and she appreciated the distinction. And what did asking around tell you? That you're good at your job, that you have 7-month-old twins, that you recently went through a difficult divorce, and that you come here every Tuesday and Thursday around 2:30. He paused. And that you don't suffer fools. Accurate, she said. I'm not a fool, he said. That's exactly what a fool would say. He smiled again, that same unhurried smile, and said, Fair enough. I'll have to show you instead. Clara looked at him for a long moment. She was not naive. She had been married to a man she trusted completely and watched him construct an alternate life right under her nose for at least a year, maybe longer, with such ease that she had never suspected a thing. She had stood in her kitchen reading emails that weren't meant for her and felt the floor drop out from under her. She had signed divorce papers while 7 months pregnant and moved into her best friend's spare room and delivered 2 premature babies in emergency surgery and sat in a hospital hallway at 3 in the V, mourning, not knowing if her daughter was going to be okay. She knew what bad judgment looked like. She had lived inside its consequences, but she also knew, somewhere in the practical core of her, that letting one person's betrayal dictate the rest of her life was its own kind of imprisonment. Ethan had taken enough from her. She was not going to let him take this too, this small tentative thing that felt like the very beginning of something. Not a guarantee, not a promise, just a door left slightly open. I'm not ready for anything serious, she said. I have infant twins and a job I'm trying to hold on to, and exactly 0 bandwidth for drama. Understood. I mean it. I know you mean it. Okay, she said. They started slow. Coffee twice a week. Then dinner once, a quiet Italian place where the booths were high-backed and private, and you could have a real conversation without performing it for anyone else. He met Noah and Lily at 6 weeks, and not because Clara had planned the introduction, but because he happened to stop by Maya's building to pick Clara up for dinner, and Maya, who had no patience for artificial timelines when she was holding a baby, who was smiling at the ceiling and being generally delightful, opened the door and said, Come in, they're in a great mood. Daniel sat on the living room floor in his work clothes and played with 2 infants for 20 minutes with complete unself-consciousness, no performance, no trying too hard, just showing up and being present, and Clara watched from the kitchen doorway and thought, oh, this is going to be a problem. Not a bad problem, just a real one. She had been careful all those weeks not to think too far ahead, but watching him hold Lily against his chest, while Lily grabbed his collar with her whole fist and looked very serious about it, Clara felt something loosen in her chest that had been wound tight for a long time. She did not tell Ethan about Daniel. That was not a conversation she owed him. Their communication was limited and functional. Co-parenting logistics, medical updates, the mechanics of shared custody arrangements that were still being finalized. Ethan had visitation twice a week, supervised by mutual agreement, because the divorce had not yet been fully settled and the lawyers were still working out the terms. He showed up when he was supposed to. He was attentive with the twins. Clara gave him that much he loved his children in a real and genuine way, and whatever she thought of him as a husband, she had never doubted that. She also knew, from Maya's social media checks, because Maya was constitutionally incapable of leaving things alone, that Ethan and Vanessa had gotten back together approximately 6 weeks after Ethan ended things with her in the hospital parking lot, in a conversation that Vanessa had apparently told half of Jackson about. Clara hadn't asked for the details. She didn't want them. What she wanted, mostly, was for everyone to leave her alone so she could figure out how to sleep through the night again, and whether Lily was eating enough, and whether the Kellerman account was going to survive Q4. That was all. That was what her life looked like in November, and it was fine. It was genuinely fine. Then Ethan put a ring on Vanessa's finger in Meridian Steakhouse and posted it to Instagram at 8:47 on a Wednesday night, and Maya's phone lit up with notifications before Clara's did, and Maya made a sound that was not quite a word and brought her phone to Clara's room and showed her the screen. Clara looked at the photo for a long time. It was a good photo staged, she could tell, the lighting too warm and deliberate to be accidental. Vanessa's hand spread flat on the tablecloth, with the ring catching the candlelight just right. Ethan was grinning in the background, that particular grin he had when he knew a camera was on him, wide and confident and slightly performed. When you finally stop settling and choose happiness. She read the caption twice. She set the phone on her nightstand. She looked at the ceiling. Clara, Maya said, I'm fine. You don't have to be fine. No, I really am, Clara said. And then after a moment, he proposed in Meridian. Maya already knew. Maya had gone silent in the way she went silent when she was furious on someone else's behalf and controlling it very carefully. Yeah, that was Clara stopped. She had been about to say our restaurant, but that was not quite right. It had been their restaurant once, and then it had become his, and then it had become nothing. She had not been back since before the twins were born. Never mind. She slept fine that night, which surprised her a little. The next morning, she made coffee and fed the twins and texted Daniel, "How's Thursday?" He texted back immediately, "Thursday works." "You okay?" She looked at the question for a moment, thinking about how to answer it. She settled on the truth, getting there. He sent back, "That's enough." And it was enough for now, which was all she was asking of herself. The complication with Ethan began not with the engagement announcement, but with what came after it. Vanessa Cole was not. Clara had always suspected, particularly good at being patient. She had the energy of someone who was used to getting what she wanted quickly and recalibrating her approach when she didn't. What she wanted now, what became clear over the following 2 weeks, through a series of small escalations that Maya cataloged with the precision of a woman who had decided she was going to be ready for whatever came next, was to establish herself as the primary female presence in Ethan's domestic life, which included, inevitably, his children. It started with a text. Ethan sent it on a Friday morning, during his scheduled visitation. "Vanessa's with me today. Is that okay?" Clara stared at it. They had a custody arrangement, still provisional, that Ethan's attorney and her attorney were in the process of formalizing. There was nothing in the current agreement that explicitly addressed the presence of new partners during visitation. Clara had assumed that was an oversight. She was now understanding that oversights had consequences. She called her attorney, a sharp woman named Catherine Solis, who had been navigating family law in the city for 19 years, and had the temperament of someone who had seen every variation of this particular playbook. "He technically has the right," Catherine said. "The current agreement doesn't restrict it, but I can request an amendment. How long will that take?" "A few weeks, maybe longer if he contests it." "Does he have grounds to contest?" "Not strong ones, but he could try to drag it out." Clara thought about Noah and Lily, 6 months old, handed off to Ethan in an apartment where Vanessa Cole was now apparently a fixture. She thought about Vanessa, who had spent the better part of a year being the reason Clara's marriage fell apart, now sitting on the floor, playing with her children. "Request the amendment," she said. She sent Ethan a single text in reply to his, "That's something we should discuss with our attorneys present, not over text." He didn't respond for 3 hours. When he did, it was short, fine. She held herself very still that afternoon. She did not want to fight. She did not want drama. She wanted a clean, functional co-parenting arrangement where her children were safe and loved, and where she never had to be in the same room as Vanessa Cole unless absolutely unavoidable. She told Daniel about it that Thursday over dinner. Not because she needed advice, she had Catherine for that, but because she was tired of performing composure, and he was the person she was least inclined to perform for. "How are you handling it?" he asked. "With significant internal profanity," she said. He nodded, which was the right response. He did not offer solutions or tell her what he would do, or suggest that she look at it from Ethan's perspective. He just listened. She was at the visitation, Clara said. I found out from my sister-in-law. Ethan's sister called me because she was uncomfortable with it and thought I should know. What do you want to do about it? Catherine's filing for an amendment to the custody arrangement. Supervised visitation only until Vanessa's role in their lives is formally established and assessed. Is that going to hold? Catherine thinks so. The judge on our case is cautious with infants. She'll want the arrangement to be stable before she starts introducing variables. Daniel was quiet for a moment. Then, do you want me to? Is there anything I can do? Logistically, I mean. Not I know this isn't my situation. She looked at him across the table. There was something that always slightly startled her about his awareness of that boundary, the precision with which he understood where his role ended. Most people in her experience did not understand that. Most people in a new relationship wanted to be useful so badly that they overreached. He'd know, she said. But thank you, okay. Ethan's going to find out about you eventually, she said. It wasn't something she'd planned to say. It just surfaced. I know. He won't like it, I imagine not. He's going to make it into something. She set her fork down. He'll frame it some way that makes it about him. Like you're some kind of response to him. Like I'm doing this to score a point. Daniel considered that for a moment. Are you worried about what he'll think? No, she said and meant it. I'm worried about what he'll do. There's a difference. He understood that distinction too. She could see it in the way he looked at her. Then we handle it when it comes. Clara picked her fork back up. Yeah, she said. We do. It came sooner than she expected and in a way she hadn't anticipated. Ethan saw them together on a Saturday afternoon outside Fenwick Park, where Clara had brought the twins for a walk, and Daniel had come along, because he was already at Maya's apartment, helping move a piece of furniture that had been delivered to the wrong room, which was such an ordinary, domestic reason to be somewhere that Clara had not even thought of it as notable. But Ethan had been at the park to coincidence, or at least she assumed so, because Ethan was not the type to arrange for chance encounters. He'd always been too direct for that. He was there with a friend, some business acquaintance, whose name she barely remembered, and he saw her from across the pathway, and then he saw Daniel, and his face did something complicated. Clara watched it happen. She had spent 7 years learning the architecture of Ethan Whitmore's face, the way pride and shock moved across it, the specific way his jaw tightened when something didn't go the way he'd expected. She saw all of it in about 4 seconds and looked away. Daniel had seen it too, because he saw most things. He said nothing. He kept pushing the stroller, Noah on the left, Lily on the right, both of them awake and looking at the trees with the intense philosophical focus that small babies brought to everything. Ethan crossed the path to reach them. Clara. His voice was careful. Not angry. Ethan was rarely openly angry. He processed his reactions internally and presented the edited version. Ethan, she stopped. Neutral, professional almost. His eyes moved to Daniel, and there was a moment where something flashed through them: recognition, or the need for it. I don't think we've met, he said to Daniel, and the weave was deliberate. You are standing in my space. Who are you? Daniel looked at him. He was not a man who gave ground easily. Clara was learning, but he also didn't perform aggression. He just stood there, steady, like someone who had nothing to prove to anyone at this park today. Daniel Hargrove, he said. Ethan's friend made a small sound, almost nothing, barely audible, and Ethan's eyes cut sideways for half a second before coming back. Ethan Whitmore, he said. Clara's, we have children together. I know who you are, Daniel said. The silence lasted about 2 seconds. In those 2 seconds, Clara watched Ethan perform a recalibration. She recognized the particular stillness of a man processing information that did not match his internal model of a situation and deciding quickly how to handle it. Daddy, Ethan said, bending down to the stroller, addressing the twins, and Clara let him because he was their father, and they reached for him immediately, and that mattered more than any of the rest of it. He stayed for 5 minutes. He was polite. He was controlled. He kissed both twins on the head and stood up and said to Clara, Catherine got back to my attorney about the amendment, and Clara said, I know, and Ethan looked at Daniel one more time and said, Good to meet you, and walked back toward his friend. Clara watched him go. That went okay, she said. More to herself than to Daniel. It went fine, Daniel said. She thought at the time that he was right. She was not yet thinking about Vanessa. She was not yet thinking about what Ethan's friend had seen, or who he might tell, or what story would begin circulating through their shared social circle by Monday morning. She was not yet thinking about the Instagram post, the new one, The one Ethan had not yet made, but was already, in some part of himself she knew too well, composing. She was just thinking about the twins, and the park, and the November light coming through the oak trees, and the fact that she had managed to eat a full breakfast, and the coffee had not made her hands shake, and she was provisionally, carefully, okay. For now, that was enough. She would deal with the rest when it arrived. It always arrived eventually. The Instagram post went up on a Sunday. Clara found out about it, the way she found out about most things involving Ethan's public behavior now through Maya, who had apparently set up some kind of notification system for Ethan's social media that she had never fully explained and that Clara had learned not to ask about. Maya appeared in the kitchen doorway at 7:43 in the morning while Clara was trying to get Lily to finish a bottle, holding her phone out with the expression of someone delivering news they had been preparing themselves to deliver. "You need to see this," Maya said. "I'm a little busy." "Clara." The tone made her look up. She took the phone one-handed, Lily still tucked against her arm, and looked at the screen. It was a photo of Ethan and Vanessa at what appeared to be a brunch soft morning light, mimosas, the kind of deliberately composed casualness that took actual effort. Vanessa was laughing with her head tilted back, and Ethan was looking at her the way men looked at women in cologne advertisements, and the caption read, "Starting the next chapter with the right person. Some things are worth the wait." Below that, buried in the comments, someone Clara vaguely recognized from their old social circle had written, "Is that who I think it is in the background of the park pic?" And someone else had responded with a fire emoji, and Ethan had liked that comment. Clara scrolled up. There was a second photo she'd miscandid, or staged to look candid, of Ethan at Fenwick Park. And in the background, slightly out of focus, but unmistakably identifiable if you were looking, was Clara with the stroller, and Daniel beside her. She handed the phone back to Maya. "He posted on purpose," Maya said. "I know, that's Clara, that's a deliberate provocation. I know that too." She looked down at Lily, who had lost interest in the bottle, and was now grabbing Clara's finger with both hands and examining it with great seriousness. "He wants me to react. That's the whole point. So what are you going to do?" "Nothing," Clara said. "Right now I'm going to finish this feeding, and then I'm going to take a shower, because I haven't taken one since Friday, and I'm starting to offend myself. And then I'm going to call Catherine on Monday and make sure this doesn't somehow affect the custody amendment." Maya stared at her. "That's it? What else would you like me to do?" "I don't know, something. Anything. He's out there making it look like you've already moved on with some guy. And meanwhile, he's parading his fiancée around like he didn't blow up your entire life 8 months ago." "Maya," Clara said it quietly, "I have moved on. That's not a secret. And he has every right to be engaged to whoever he wants to be engaged to. He doesn't have the right to use pictures of me and my children to do it. Those are different things. And Catherine is going to address the second one." Maya sat down at the kitchen table and looked at her hands. "You're very calm." "I'm extremely not calm," Clara said. "I'm just doing it quietly." That was the truth. Underneath the deliberate stillness she had been practicing since she first understood that falling apart publicly would only give Ethan exactly the narrative he was constructing the chaotic ex-wife, the cautionary tale, there was something that felt like anger, but sharper and more specific than anger. It was the particular fury of a woman who had been used as a prop in someone else's story, and was choosing very deliberately not to perform the reaction they were counting on. She texted Daniel after her shower. "Ethan posted something. Background of a park photo with you visible. Wanted to give you a heads up." He called instead of texting back, which was what he did when something was actually worth a real conversation. "Are you okay?" he said. "I'm fine," more irritated than upset. He's trying to reframe things. Reframe how? Make it look like I moved on immediately. Like you are some kind of rebound. He can sell his engagement as the real thing and make mine look reactive. She paused. "I mean not mine, us. Whatever this is, I know what you meant," he said. "Does it bother you? What people will think?" She thought about it honestly, which was what he always seemed to invite. "It bothers me that he gets to control the story," she said. "It doesn't bother me what the story is. People who know me know the truth. People who don't aren't my problem." "Okay," he said. "He's going to find out who you are soon, if he doesn't already know." "Clara," Daniel said, "let him." She almost laughed. "You don't know Ethan. I don't need to." She sat with that for a moment. There was something in his steadiness that she had not yet fully figured out how to accept, not because she was ungrateful for it, but because she was still calibrating how much of it to trust. She was not, despite everything, a cynical person. She still believed that people were mostly what they appeared to be, mostly doing their best with what they had. But she had also learned, at significant cost, that some people showed you only the version of themselves they had decided you should see, and that the version they hid was the one that mattered. Daniel had not shown her anything that felt hidden. That was either very good, or it was the most sophisticated version of a thing she had encountered and didn't yet recognize. She genuinely didn't know which. She was paying attention. "Catherine's filing the amendment Monday," she said. "Good. I'll let you know how it goes." "Clara," he said before she could hang up. For what it's worth, he posted that because seeing you in that park shook him, not the other way around. She sat with that too. "Then you don't know that. I know what a man looks like when he realizes he miscalculated something important," Daniel said. "I've been that man." She didn't ask what he meant. "Not yet. I'll talk to you later," she said. "Yeah, call me if you need anything." She hung up and looked at the ceiling and thought about the park and about Ethan's face in that moment, that 2-second recalibration, and thought that Daniel might not be entirely wrong. The amendment filing went through on Tuesday. Catherine called at noon to tell her that the judge had flagged it for an expedited review, given the ages of the children involved and the still provisional nature of the custody arrangement. They were looking at a hearing in 3 weeks. Ethan's attorney, a man named Preston Webb, who had a reputation for strategic delay, filed a counter-response by Friday that essentially argued the amendment was unnecessary and driven by personal animosity rather than the children's welfare. Clara sat in Catherine's office and read it twice. "He's saying I'm filing this because I don't like Vanessa," Clara said. "He's trying to reframe the question," Catherine said. She was a compact woman with close-cropped hair and reading glasses she wore pushed up on her head when she wasn't using them, which was most of the time. "The judge will see through it. The question before the court isn't whether you like Vanessa. It's what's appropriate for 6-month-old infants who spent their first weeks in intensive neonatal care. Can he slow this down?" "Preston can slow most things down," Catherine said, with a dryness that Clara appreciated. "But not indefinitely. And not on this. Judge Renata Voss does not like unnecessary delays in cases involving infants. How do you know which judge it is?" "I checked." Clara exhaled. "Okay, so what do we do now? We document everything. Every communication from Ethan, every change in schedule, every moment when Vanessa was present during visitation that he didn't disclose in advance." Catherine took off her glasses and looked at Clara directly. "And I need to ask you something, and I need you to answer me honestly." "Okay. Is your new relationship with Daniel Hargrove going to complicate this?" The question landed with precision. Clara had been expecting it, had been expecting someone to ask it, either Catherine or Maya or Daniel himself, but hearing it out loud still had a particular weight. "In what way?" "In the way that Ethan's attorney is going to try to use it," Catherine said. "He's going to argue that you introduced a new male figure into your children's lives without disclosure and without the court's knowledge, while simultaneously filing to restrict Ethan's ability to have his partner present. He'll call it a double standard." Clara thought about that. The logic of it was infuriating precisely because it wasn't entirely wrong, not legally, not technically. "Daniel has not been introduced as anything formal," she said carefully. "He's been present in an informal social capacity. He has not had unsupervised time with the children. He has not been presented to them as any kind of parental figure. And Ethan's friend who was at the park, does he know who Daniel is?" Clara felt her stomach tighten. He might by now. "Then assume Ethan knows," Catherine said. "And assume Preston is already running Daniel Hargrove's name through every database he can access." That was the moment Clara understood that this was going to become something bigger than a park encounter and a Sunday Instagram post. Something had shifted in the mechanics of the situation. Some small but consequential gear had turned, and everything downstream of it was going to be different. She called Daniel from the parking garage below Catherine's office, sitting in her car with the engine off. "There's going to be a thing," she said when he picked up. "Tell me," she told him. All of it, the counter-response, Catherine's questions, the probability that Ethan already knew who he was, and that Preston Webb was already building something out of it. She was not a person who catastrophized, but she was also not a person who pretended problems were smaller than they were, and this one had the potential to become genuinely complicated. Daniel listened without interrupting, which was something she had come to depend on the simple fact of being listened to, without having someone construct their response while she was still talking. When she finished, he said, "What do you need from me?" I need to know if there's anything in your background that Preston Webb is going to find and use. The silence lasted about 3 seconds, not hesitation exactly, more like the pause of a man who was going to answer carefully and honestly and wanted to make sure he got the language right. I went through a divorce 6 years ago, he said. It was not clean. My ex-wife and I disagreed about almost everything by the end, and the attorneys made it worse before they made it better. There were accusations, nothing criminal, nothing that held up, but accusations. It's all public record if someone looks. Clara absorbed that. What kind of accusations? Controlling behavior. Financial manipulation. He paused. None of it was substantiated. But none of it disappears either. Were they true? Another pause, slightly longer. Parts of it. Not the way she framed it, but I was not a good husband at the end. I was not present. I prioritized work in a way it was a real marriage failing, just not the one she described to the judge. Clara sat with that for a long moment. She appreciated that he had not immediately denied everything or built a defense. She also understood that she was getting one side of something complicated, which was always the case with other people's marriages, and especially with other people's divorces. Okay, she said, I'll give you my attorney's information. If Catherine needs documentation of the final resolution, we can provide that. Okay, she said again. Are you all right? She looked through the windshield at the concrete pillar of the parking garage, gray and unremarkable. I'm recalibrating, she said. That's fair. I want to be clear that I'm not. She stopped and started again. I just needed to know what was real, before it became someone else's version of what's real. I understand that, he said. And then I should have told you earlier, before it became relevant in this way. That's on me. She thought about that. Thought about the difference between withholding and simply not yet arriving at a conversation that hadn't been called for yet. She was not sure where the line was. She was not sure anyone was. We'll talk about it more this week, she said. Whenever you're ready. She drove home. She made dinner pasta from a box because it was Thursday, and she'd gone to the grocery store on Sunday and hadn't gotten to the store since, and there were nights when boxed pasta was the correct answer, and she had made peace with that. She fed the twins. She bathed Noah, who had managed to smear something orange and mysterious in his ear. She settled them down, and then she sat on the couch with a cup of tea that went cold, while Maya watched something on television in the background and asked once quietly, "You okay?" And Clara said, "Yeah," and Maya nodded and didn't push. The thing about Maya was that she had known Clara long enough to understand the difference between the silence that needed company and the silence that needed space. That night it was the second kind, and Maya gave it to her without making her ask. Clara was thinking about Ethan, not about the Instagram post, not about Preston Webb's counter-response, not about the hearing in 3 weeks. She was thinking about something smaller and older than all of that. She was thinking about the version of Ethan she had married, the one she had believed in completely, the one who had seemed so sure of himself and of them, the one who had made her feel for a while like she was standing on solid ground. She had not been stupid. She wanted to be clear about that, at least to herself. She had not missed obvious signs or ignored red flags. She had trusted someone who had spent considerable energy being trustworthy in all the ways she could see and deceptive in exactly the ways she couldn't. And that was not the same thing as being naive. It was the same thing as being human. What she was still figuring out quietly, in the space between feeding schedules and legal filings and whatever was happening with Daniel, was how to hold both truths at the same time, that she had loved Ethan, really loved him, and that he had done something real and lasting and serious to her, and that neither of those things canceled the other out. They both just existed side by side, the way most truths about a person's life existed. She was working on being okay with that. She was not all the way there yet. The hearing was scheduled for a Tuesday, 3 weeks out, and in the days between the filing and the hearing, the thing Clara had been waiting for the escalation. The move she knew was coming from Ethan's side arrived through an unexpected channel. It was Ethan's mother, Linda Whitmore. Linda had been, throughout the marriage, a complicated presence, not unkind, exactly, not deliberately cruel, but so thoroughly organized around her son's well-being and self-image that she had a practiced blindness toward anything that threatened either. When Clara had shown her the emails when the divorce had first been filed, and Clara, in a moment of exhaustion and raw need for someone from Ethan's family to understand what had actually happened, had made the mistake of showing Linda the actual evidence, Linda had looked at the screen for a long moment and then said, "I'm sure there's more to this than what it looks like. And Clara had understood, in that instant, that this was a woman who had been making that particular accommodation for her son for his entire life. Linda called on a Wednesday morning, which was unusual. Linda usually texted. Phone calls meant something had been decided. "Clara, I wanted to reach out personally," Linda said, with the careful warmth of a woman reading from a prepared version of herself. "I know things have been difficult between you and Ethan. I know this divorce process has been hard on everyone. I want you to know that I personally hope it can be resolved peacefully." "I hope that too, Linda," Clara said. "The children need stability. I think we both agree on that." "Completely. And I hope that you might be willing to consider whether some of the legal actions being taken right now are truly in service of that stability, or whether they might be making things more complicated for everyone." A pause, precisely placed, including the children. Clara heard it clearly, the hand wrapped in a glove, but unmistakably a hand. "I appreciate your concern, Linda. The actions being taken are on the advice of my attorney, and in the best interests of Noah and Lily's well-being. I don't think this is something we should be discussing without attorneys present." A silence. Then, "Of course. I understand. How are you doing?" Clara said, because she was not going to let this become a fight. "How's Richard?" Linda's husband, a quiet, retiring man who had always seemed faintly apologetic about his wife, without being able to do much about it. "We're well. Excited about the engagement." The warmth tightened slightly on the word, like a lid being pressed down on something. Ethan is very happy." "I'm glad to hear it," Clara said, and she was surprised to find that some small part of her actually meant it not for Ethan's sake, or Vanessa's, but because a happy Ethan was a calmer Ethan, and a calmer Ethan was a better co-parent, and that was all she needed him to be. She called Catherine immediately after hanging up and relayed the conversation word for word. Catherine made a sound that was not quite a word. "He sent his mother. She said she was calling personally." "Of course she did." Catherine was typing something in the background. "This gets added to the documentation. Indirect contact attempting to discourage legal proceedings. It's not actionable on its own, but it establishes a pattern if it continues. She's not going to stop." "No, but we're not asking her to stop. We're just making sure everything she does is on record." Catherine paused. "Has Ethan reached out to you directly about the hearing?" "Not yet, he will. Probably through text, to keep it casual." "Don't engage. Anything he wants to communicate goes through Preston Webb." Clara spent the rest of that week in the particular limbo of waiting for something you know is coming, but can't control the timing of. The twins were going through a growth spurt simultaneously, which meant disrupted sleep for everyone and a level of exhaustion that made everything feel approximately 30% more difficult than it actually was. Noah had discovered that he could make a sound that was halfway between a squeal and a bark, and he used it frequently and without apparent purpose. And Clara found it either charming or unbearable, depending entirely on how much sleep she'd gotten. She and Daniel had dinner on Thursday, and she told him about Linda's phone call, and he listened with his elbows on the table and his coffee going cold the way her tea always did, and at the end of it he said, "His mother called to ask you to drop the custody filing." Politely. "That's not polite. That's just pressure in a nicer font." She laughed despite herself. "Yes, that's exactly what it is." "What are you going to do?" "Nothing. Catherine's handling it." He nodded. "You're good at that. Not doing things." "What does that mean?" "Most people, when someone pokes at them, they poke back. You just wait." Clara considered that. "It's not patience," she said. "It's more like I understand what Ethan needs me to do, so I do the opposite. That takes discipline. It takes being really genuinely tired of giving him what he wants." He smiled at that, the honest smile, not the performed one. She had learned to tell the difference. They walked out of the restaurant together, and he held the door. And she thought about what Catherine had said about Daniel being used as a counter-argument in the custody hearing, about Preston Webb building a case out of something that was still new and uncertain and not yet named between them. She thought about the divorce in his past, the accusations, the parts that were true and the parts that weren't. She thought about how much of knowing a person was learning to hold the complicated version of them and not reduce it to something simpler and more manageable. On the sidewalk, he paused and said, "I want you to know something." "Okay. Whatever happens with the hearing, whatever Preston Webb does with my name or my history, I won't disappear. I'm not making a declaration here. I just want you to know the practical fact of it. I'm not going to create problems for you and then vanish." She looked at him in the November cold, the streetlights catching the gray at his temples that she'd noticed early and found unreasonably reassuring. "You can't know that," she said. "You don't know what he's going to do." "No," he said, "but I know what I'm going to do." She didn't answer that. She wasn't ready to. Not yet. But she thought about it on the drive home, and she was still thinking about it when she checked on the twins at midnight and found them both asleep. Noah on his back with his arms thrown wide. Lily on her side with her fist tucked under her chin, and she stood in the doorway of their room in the dark and felt the particular quality of quiet that existed in that apartment at that hour, and thought, "This is what matters. This is the thing I am protecting." Everything else was noise. But the noise was getting louder, and 3 days later, when Ethan texted her at 10 in the morning, "Can we talk? Without the attorneys? Just us?" she understood that the next move had arrived. She did not respond right away. She set her phone face down on her desk at work and stared at the wall for about 30 seconds, and then she picked it back up and forwarded the text to Catherine. Catherine's response was a single word, "Good." Meaning, "Don't answer." Meaning, "This goes on record." Meaning, "We have him now making informal contact before a formal hearing," which is exactly the kind of pattern they needed established. Clara put her phone away and went back to the Kellerman account. The hearing was in 11 days. She was not afraid of it. She was tired, and she was running on interrupted sleep. And she had a daughter who was slightly behind her developmental markers, and a son who was slightly ahead, and a job she was trying to do well, and a something she didn't have a name for, with a man she was still figuring out, and she was doing all of it without falling apart, which was not nothing. She was not afraid of Ethan Whitmore in a courtroom. She had stopped being afraid of him somewhere around the second night, in the NICU, when she had sat alone next to Lily's incubator and understood, with a clarity that felt almost physical, that she had survived the worst of it already and that survival had not required him. She just needed the judge to see what she saw. She thought, most of the time, that she had enough evidence for that. Most of the time. The hearing was on a Tuesday, and it rained. Not dramatically, not a storm, not the kind of weather that announces itself and gives you something to push against. Just a steady, gray, mid-November rain that made everything look slightly more exhausted than it was, that soaked through Clara's umbrella at the edge where the fabric had started to separate from the frame, and that turned the parking garage outside the Harlow County Family Court building into an echo chamber of dripping and distant car engines. Catherine met her in the lobby at 8:15. She was wearing a dark blazer and carrying 2 coffees, which Clara accepted without ceremony, and drank standing up, because the chairs near the entrance were already occupied by a family. She didn't know having a conversation that sounded several degrees past tense. Preston filed a supplemental response yesterday afternoon, Catherine said without preamble. Clara stopped drinking. What kind of supplemental response? He's arguing that the amendment request should be evaluated in the context of both parties' new relationships, not just Ethan's. He's named Daniel. Clara looked at her coffee cup. Of course he did. He has a photograph, the park photo from Ethan's Instagram, and he's attached a summary of Daniel's background. The divorce, the allegations, the resolution. Catherine said it evenly, without inflection, which was how she delivered information she wanted Clara to receive without reacting to immediately. He's framing it as a reciprocal concern. If the court is going to scrutinize Vanessa's presence during Ethan's visitation, it should also scrutinize Daniel's presence during yours. It's not the same situation. No. But he's betting Judge Voss won't want to appear one-sided. Catherine glanced toward the elevator bank. I filed a response at 7 this morning. We've got 30 minutes before we go in. They sat in a smaller waiting area on the 3rd floor, away from the family in the lobby, and Catherine walked her through the sequence of arguments, the likely counter-arguments, the points where Voss had historically pushed back on delay tactics, and the one area where she was genuinely uncertain, whether the judge would treat the 2 relationships as legally symmetrical, regardless of how substantively different they were. Clara listened. She asked 3 questions. She did not panic, which she recognized as its own kind of accomplishment, given the particular quality of dread that courthouse waiting areas produced, that institutional quiet, the fluorescent overhead lights, the sense that everything personal and private was about to be examined by strangers, according to rules she only partially understood. Ethan arrived with Preston Webb at 8:52. Vanessa was not with him, which Clara noticed, and Catherine had already predicted. Preston was too experienced to let Ethan walk into a hearing about Vanessa's role in visitation with Vanessa physically present. He was wearing the charcoal suit he wore to things he wanted to win. Clara recognized it. She had bought it for him 3 birthdays ago from a men's shop downtown that he'd pointed out once in passing and then claimed to have forgotten about. He saw her across the hallway. He gave her a nod, careful, neutral, the nod of a man performing reasonableness. She returned it and looked back at Catherine. Preston and Catherine exchanged the brief, professional courtesy of opposing attorneys who had worked against each other enough times to skip the pleasantries and go straight to mutual wariness. Clara watched them and thought about how strange it was all these years of a life with someone, all the dinners and arguments and inside jokes and a pregnancy and 2 children in incubators, and now this, communicating through intermediaries in a hallway that smelled like industrial carpet cleaner. Judge Renata Voss was 61, sharp-featured, and had a reputation in Catherine's circles for patience that ran exactly as far as she let it and not 1 inch further. She came onto the bench at 9:04 and settled her reading glasses on her nose and looked at both tables with the expression of a woman who had seen this particular configuration many times and was going to proceed efficiently, regardless of how complicated either side wanted to make it. "We're here on a petition to amend the interim custody arrangement," she said, filed by Ms. Clara Whitmore, regarding visitation conditions for minor children Noah and Lily Whitmore, aged 7 months. Counsel for the petitioner? Catherine stood. Catherine Solis, Your Honor, on behalf of the petitioner. Counsel for the respondent? Preston Rose. Preston Webb, Your Honor, on behalf of Ethan Whitmore. Mr. Webb, I've reviewed your supplemental response. I want to address it before we proceed to the merits of the petition, because I find several aspects of it, shall we say, tangential. Voss removed her glasses and looked at him directly. You've raised concerns about the petitioner's new relationship as a basis for arguing against the amendment. Help me understand the relevance. Preston was too experienced to look flustered. Your Honor, if the court is being asked to impose restrictions on Mr. Whitmore's right to have his fiancée present during visitation, it's our position that the same scrutiny should apply equally to Ms. Whitmore. Mr. Webb, Voss's voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. The petition before me concerns whether it is appropriate for a woman who is the active third party in this marriage dissolution to have unsupervised access to 7-month-old infants during their father's visitation. That is the question. Whether or not Ms. Whitmore has a new relationship is only relevant to this proceeding if you have evidence that her new relationship poses a specific and documented risk to these children. Do you have such evidence? Preston paused. 1 beat. 2. We have documentation of a prior legal dispute involving. A prior legal dispute, Voss repeated, from 6 years ago, that was resolved without criminal findings, in a different state, involving different parties. I've read your supplemental, Mr. Webb. What I have not found in it is a single documented instance of any negative impact on these specific children from any contact they may have had with this individual. She put her glasses back on. Is there such an instance? At this time, no, Your Honor. However, then I'm going to ask you to confine your arguments today to the matters at hand. She looked at both sides. Ms. Solis, you may proceed. Catherine was good at her job in the way that genuinely competent people were good at their jobs, not showy, not theatrical, just precise and relentlessly prepared. She presented the timeline, the initial informal disclosure by Ethan's own sister that Vanessa had been present during visitation without prior notice, the text message Ethan had sent asking for retroactive permission the same day, the pattern of informal communication attempting to circumvent the formal process, the documented history of Vanessa Cole's role in the dissolution of the marriage. She did not characterize Vanessa with heat or obvious personal judgment. She just laid facts on the table in sequence and let them accumulate. Preston's counter-argument was that Ethan had communicated openly, had sought permission proactively, and that the amendment was disproportionate, a mechanism of personal conflict dressed up as a concern for child welfare. He used the phrase weaponizing the legal process twice, which Clara noticed made Voss's expression do something subtle and not particularly favorable. Ethan was called to give a brief statement. He was composed, which Clara had expected. Ethan in professional settings was almost always composed. It was one of the things she had admired, and one of the things she had never fully understood. He spoke about his commitment to his children, his recognition that the divorce had been painful, his desire for a co-parenting arrangement that was functional and forward-looking. He said Vanessa had been present twice during visitation and had been attentive and appropriate with the twins. He said he had reached out to Clara before the second visit. After the fact, Catherine noted quietly, and Voss made a small sound of acknowledgement. Then Preston did the thing Clara had been waiting for, because it was, she supposed, the thing he'd been preparing all along. He asked the court to note, for the record, that Ms. Whitmore's companion Daniel Hargrove was a private equity investor with a prior divorce proceeding that included allegations of controlling behavior. Voss looked at him over her glasses. And the court should be aware. Mr. Webb, Voss said, with the patience of someone who has given a person their last reasonable opportunity, I am aware of what you filed. I am asking you to tell me why it is relevant to the welfare of these 7-month-old children today in this proceeding. Preston had the grace to leave it there. Voss deliberated for 6 minutes. Clara timed it on the clock above the door and then came back with an oral ruling that Catherine had told her was the likely outcome, and that still felt, when it happened, like something releasing in her chest that she hadn't fully known was clenched. The amendment was granted. Going forward, the presence of any new romantic partner, applicable to both parties equally during visitation, with the twins required 30 days advance written notice and the other party's explicit written consent. Any disputes went through the attorneys. No unilateral decisions. No after-the-fact disclosures. Voss applied it symmetrically, which was the right call legally, and which Clara had no objection to, because Daniel had not been present during any formal visitation arrangement, and because she was not planning to introduce the twins to him in any formal capacity until things were significantly more settled. This was not something she had discussed openly with Daniel, but it was something she had been thinking about with the practical clarity that the NICU had permanently installed in her approach to decisions involving her children. Ethan caught her eye in the hallway after they filed out. Preston had gone ahead, which left Ethan standing near the elevator in his charcoal suit, with his hands in his pockets, and Clara was 2 steps past him before she registered that he'd taken a small, deliberate step in her direction. She stopped. Catherine had gone to the restroom. It was just the 2 of them in the corridor, which happened sometimes, even when you had tried to engineer it away. That wasn't what I wanted, Ethan said. Coming in here and making this into a legal thing. I know, Clara said. I wanted to be able to have both parts of my life coexist. I wasn't trying to, he stopped. I wasn't trying to shove her in your face. Clara looked at him. He was, she thought, probably being honest. Ethan's self-knowledge had always had this particular shape, genuine in the moment, limited in its retrospect. He wasn't lying when he said he hadn't meant to hurt her. He just had never been particularly good at tracing the line between what he intended and what he caused. Ethan, she said, you proposed in Meridian. You posted a photo with me in the background and liked comments about it. I don't know what you call that, but it's not coexisting. He had the decency to look away. That was Vanessa's idea. The restaurant. I know. It doesn't matter whose idea it was. No, he said. I know it doesn't. She didn't want to hurt him. She wanted to be clear about that. At least to herself, she did not want to win something at Ethan's expense, did not want his suffering, did not want, as she had told Maya several times, to spend one more unit of emotional energy on Ethan Whitmore than the co-parenting of their children absolutely required. But she also was not going to pretend that things were fine when they weren't, or smooth over his mistakes to make him feel better, because she had done that for most of their marriage, and she understood now what that habit had cost both of them. The ruling is fair, she said. 30 days notice, both parties. That's workable. He nodded. I know. Then let's work it. She walked to the elevator and pressed the button and did not look back. Catherine was waiting for her near the building entrance, shaking water from her umbrella. She looked at Clara's face and said, he talked to you in the hall. Briefly. What did he say? That he didn't mean for it to escalate? That the restaurant was Vanessa's idea? Catherine absorbed that. And I told him the ruling was workable and to work it. Clara pulled her coat tighter. The rain had not stopped. That's all. Good, Catherine said, which was what she said when something had gone the way it was supposed to go. They walked to their separate cars. Clara sat in hers for a few minutes before starting it, not doing anything in particular, just sitting, the rain on the windshield, the parking garage around her. She texted Daniel, ruling in our favor. Symmetric application. Catherine was right. He texted back almost immediately. You okay? She thought about it. Really thought about it. Not the reflexive answer. Yeah, she typed. Tired, relieved, a little sad, which is weird. Not weird, he wrote back. Courtrooms are where things get officially real. She sat with that. Then she started the car and drove back to work because Noah and Lily were at Maya's, and her afternoon was full, and the Kellerman account was not going to manage itself. The week that followed was quieter than she expected. Ethan did not text her directly again. Preston Webb's office sent a formal acknowledgement of the amended arrangement, correctly formatted and professionally bland, and Catherine filed it and sent Clara a copy, and that was, for the moment, that. Vanessa posted something on Instagram 3 days after the hearing, a photograph of herself and Ethan at a dinner event. Vanessa in a red dress that was obviously deliberate. The caption moving forward beautifully. Clara saw it because Maya showed her, despite Clara's ongoing position that she did not need to see Vanessa Cole's social media content, and she looked at it for about 4 seconds and then handed the phone back and said, "She looks good in red," and Maya stared at her. "That's it? What do you want me to say? I don't know." "Something. Anything. She does look good in red," Clara repeated. "I've never been able to wear red. It washes me out." "She can wear it. Good for her." Maya looked at her for a long moment and then laughed a real laugh, the kind that comes from somewhere genuine. "You are so strange," she said fondly. "I know," Clara agreed. What Clara did not say, because she was not sure yet how to say it, was that the anger had changed. It was still there, it had not resolved into anything clean or simple, because anger about real betrayal did not do that. Not on anyone's timeline, but it had shifted from something hot and immediate to something more like background noise. A frequency she could hear, but had stopped organizing her whole life around. Part of that was the hearing. Having a judge look at the facts and render a decision had given her something she hadn't realized she needed. The external confirmation that what she'd been through was real, that her concerns were legitimate, that the law itself saw something worth protecting in her position. That mattered more than she expected it to. Part of it was the twins. Noah had started reaching for her face when she held him, pressing his palm flat against her cheek with the focused intention of a person conducting important research, and it did something to her chest every time. Lily had figured out how to roll from her back to her stomach and seemed both startled and deeply pleased with herself about it. They were changing fast now, accelerating into themselves, and watching it happen was the kind of thing that made it very difficult to allocate significant emotional resources to Instagram posts in red dresses. And part of it, the part she was still figuring out how to categorize, was Daniel. She had told him, after the hearing, about Ethan's comment in the hallway, about the restaurant being Vanessa's idea, about her response. He had listened and then asked what she actually thought about it. Not what she'd said, but what she thought. "I think he means it when he says he didn't want it to escalate," she said. Ethan has always been someone who wants the good version of things without paying the full cost of the bad version. He wanted to be engaged to Vanessa and also have me remain somewhere in the background being quietly okay with everything. He didn't plan the escalation because he didn't think about the consequences clearly. That doesn't make it better. No, she agreed, but it makes it comprehensible, which is different. He had looked at her across the table. "Do you still love him?" The question was direct. In the way she had learned, he was direct, not aggressive, not jealous, just genuinely asking something that was relevant, and which he thought she would answer honestly if asked plainly. She considered it with the seriousness it deserved. "I love the person I thought he was," she said finally. "I'm still grieving the marriage I thought I had. Those things are real. But the person sitting in that courtroom today, I don't feel that way about him. He stopped being someone I could feel that way about the day I read those emails." She paused. "Is that what you were asking? Why?" He was quiet for a moment, the rare kind of quiet from him, where something was being sorted through rather than avoided. "Because I'm trying to understand where things actually are," he said. "Not what they look like from the outside, where they actually are." She looked at him. November had turned into December while she wasn't paying attention, and the restaurant they were in had a string of lights along the front window that made everything look warmer than it was. "Where do you think they are?" she said. "I think you're not ready for anyone to need too much from you right now," he said. "And I think that's completely reasonable. And I think I'm in this, whatever this is, because I want it to be in it and not because I'm waiting for you to be ready for something more. That's a complicated position. It's a true one." She appreciated the distinction. She appreciated that he had made it without making her feel guilty about the timeline or the limits or the simple fact that she was a woman with 7-month-old twins and a job and a legal proceeding and about 30% of herself left over for anything else. "I need to tell you something," she said. "Okay." I haven't been entirely fair to you. About the divorce stuff, the accusations, the history. I asked you about it, and then I filed it away and moved on, and I haven't come back to it. And I should have. He was quiet again, waiting. I don't think I'm afraid of it, she said. I need to understand it better. The actual story. Not the legal summary. Okay, he said. Do you want to hear it now or not now? But soon. I mean it. I know you mean it, he said, which was what she had said to him weeks ago at the coffee shop where he'd first sat across from her uninvited. He remembered things. That was worth something. She drove home that night thinking about the layers of a person, how many of them there were, how long it took to find them, how differently the same person could look, depending on which layer you were looking at. She thought about Ethan in the hallway. That wasn't what I wanted. She thought about Daniel at the restaurant table. I'm in this because I want to be. She thought about herself at 7 months pregnant, standing in her kitchen, reading emails that weren't meant for her, and the version of herself that had survived that and delivered 2 babies and sat in a NICU and came out the other side, still fundamentally herself. She had not known, in those worst weeks, whether she would. That was the truth she didn't say out loud much, because it felt too raw and also too over, but it had been real, the genuine uncertainty about whether she was going to be okay, whether the person she was before the betrayal was recoverable, or whether something essential had been permanently altered. It hadn't been. Or more accurately, something had been altered, but it wasn't essential. Something peripheral had changed. Some assumption she'd carried about safety and permanence and the reliability of the people she loved most. That assumption was gone, and it was not coming back, and she had arrived, in its absence, at something more honest, a clearer sense of what she actually needed, what she was actually willing to offer, what she would and would not accept. That was not nothing. It was actually something she was carefully becoming grateful for, on the nights when she could be objective about it. She parked in Maya's building garage and sat in the car for a moment before going up. The rain had finally stopped. The concrete was wet and dark and quiet. Her phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number, Clara. This is Vanessa. I think we need to talk. She stared at the screen for a full 10 seconds. Then she forwarded it to Catherine with a single line, Vanessa Cole just texted me. Advice? Catherine's response came 2 minutes later. Do not respond. I'll contact Preston in the morning. Clara locked her phone and went upstairs. Maya was on the couch with Lily asleep on her chest, both of them slightly reclined. Maya with her head tipped back and her mouth slightly open, which was how Maya slept when she was deeply and genuinely out. Noah was in the bassinet in the corner, one arm thrown up beside his head, in the posture of a man who has had a very full day and is done with all of it. Clara stood in the living room doorway and looked at all 3 of them and felt, beneath the exhaustion and the legal tension and the uncertainty about everything that was unresolved, something steady and simple and hers. She went to the kitchen and put the kettle on. She was not going to text Vanessa. She was not going to speculate about what Vanessa wanted, or what Ethan knew about the text, or what this meant for the custody arrangement, or whether Preston Webb was going to try to use this as a new angle. All of that was Catherine's territory, and she was going to leave it there. What she was going to do was make tea and eat the rest of the leftover pasta from last night, and check on both twins and go to sleep. She was going to let tomorrow be tomorrow. The kettle boiled. She poured it. She sat at the kitchen table in the quiet apartment with her tea and her pasta, and the small sounds of sleeping babies in the next room, and she thought, I am still here. I am still entirely here. That was enough. It had to be enough, and tonight it actually was. Catherine called at 8:15 the next morning, which meant she had already contacted Preston Webb, which meant the Vanessa text had moved faster through the legal machinery than Clara had expected. Preston says he didn't know about it, Catherine said. Do you believe him? Honestly, yes. Preston is many things, but he doesn't let his clients make unilateral contact with opposing parties the week after a custody hearing. If he'd known Vanessa was planning to text you, he would have stopped it. A pause, which means she did it without telling Ethan either. Clara absorbed that. She was standing in the kitchen with Noah on her hip. He had entered a phase where being set down was a personal offense he took very seriously, and her coffee was on the counter getting cold. What does she want? Preston is finding out. He'll call me this afternoon. Catherine's voice had the particular texture of someone managing 2 thoughts simultaneously. In the meantime, I want you to understand something. Whatever Vanessa's reason for reaching out, curiosity, guilt, strategy, none of those reasons require your participation. You don't owe her a conversation. I know that. I'm saying it anyway, because people in your situation sometimes feel like they do. Like closure is something you have to collect from the person who hurt you. You don't. Clara looked at Noah, who was examining the strap of her shirt with the concentrated attention he gave to most physical objects. I'm not looking for closure from Vanessa, she said. I'm looking for her to stay on her side of a very clear line. Good, Catherine said. That's the right position. Preston's explanation arrived at 4:17 that afternoon, relayed through Catherine in a text that Clara read in the parking structure outside her office building while the engine ran, and the heat slowly built up inside the car. Vanessa acted independently. Ethan is not aware of the contact. She wants to explain herself. Preston has advised against it, but cannot control her. Clara read it 3 times. She called Maya. Vanessa wants to explain herself, Clara said. Maya was quiet for a moment. Explain herself how? I don't know. That's the whole of what I have. Don't do it, Maya said immediately. I haven't decided anything, Clara. Maya's voice sharpened. There is no version of that conversation that ends well for you. Either she says something that makes you angrier than you already are, or she says something that makes you feel sorry for her, and neither of those things does anything useful. I know, but you're thinking about it. Clara looked through the windshield at the concrete column directly ahead. She was the other person in my marriage, she said. She has been, for 8 months, this shape. This figure I've been organizing my legal strategy around. I don't actually know who she is. You don't need to. Maybe not, but I keep thinking she stopped. Started again. I keep thinking about what Ethan said in the hallway, that the restaurant was her idea. And I think about what kind of person does that makes that particular choice, and I can't quite figure out the shape of it. Maya was quiet for long enough that Clara could hear the twins in the background. Noah had apparently found something worth investigating, vocally. You want to understand her, Maya said finally. Not a question. I want to understand what happened, Clara said. Not legally. Just as a fact of my life. As something that actually occurred. You know what occurred. I know the outline. I don't know the inside of it, she exhaled. I'm not going to decide tonight. I'm going to go home and feed the kids and think about it. And call Daniel, Maya said, with the particular tone she used when suggesting something she considered obvious. Maybe. She did call Daniel. Later, after the twins were down, and Maya had retreated to her room and the apartment had settled into its late evening quiet. She sat on the couch with her legs tucked under her and told him about the text, the legal relay, Catherine's advice, Maya's advice, what she actually thought about all of it. He listened the way he always did all the way through, without filling the pauses. What do you want to do? He asked. I don't know yet. Okay, you're not going to tell me what to do. No. You're not even going to suggest. Would it help if I did? She thought about it honestly. Probably not. I think I need to sit with it. Then sit with it, he said. It'll still be a decision tomorrow. She appreciated that he did not frame it as something she had to resolve tonight, or as something that reflected on her judgment either way. He just left the space open. She was in my marriage, Clara said, almost to herself more than to him. She knew he was married. She knew about the twins we announced the pregnancy publicly. It was on his social media. She knew all of that, and she kept going. A pause. I'm not trying to make her the only one responsible. Ethan made his choices, but she made hers too. Yeah, Daniel said. She did. And now she wants to explain herself. Clara shook her head. That's not for my benefit. That's for hers. Probably, he agreed. Most apologies are, at least partially. She looked at the ceiling. You're divorced, she said. The accusations. You said you'd tell me the actual story. He was quiet for a moment, and she could tell this was not a topic he went to easily, not because he was hiding something, but because it was the kind of thing that required its own particular effort to revisit. Yeah, he said, okay. His marriage had lasted 9 years. Her name was Sylvia. They had met when he was 31, and building the firm from a 2-person operation into something real, and she had been in finance too, had understood that world, had been someone he could talk to about work, without translating everything. That had been the foundation, and for a long time it had been enough. When did it stop being enough? Clara asked. Gradually and then all at once, he said, which is how most things fall apart, I think. The gradually part I didn't see or didn't let myself see. The all-at-once part that was a conversation at 2 a.m. where she told me she'd been unhappy for 3 years, and I realized I hadn't known. Not because she hadn't shown it, because I hadn't been paying attention. What were you paying attention to? Work, expansion. The next deal. He said it without self-pity, just fact. I was good at building things professionally, and I applied that energy completely to the firm, and I left her alone in a marriage that was supposed to be a partnership. By the time I understood what I'd done, she had already decided she was done. The accusations, she was angry, he said, legitimately angry. And some of what she said about me controlling the finances, about making decisions unilaterally, there was truth in it. Not in the way she framed it to the attorneys, not the deliberate manipulation she described. But the outcome was the same. I made decisions about our life as if they were mine to make alone, and she didn't have full visibility into our finances because I handled everything and never thought to ask if she wanted to. It's not what she called it, but it's also not nothing. Clara sat with that. Did she know that's how you'd characterize it? Eventually. We had some honest conversations after the attorneys were done. Not enough to fix anything, but enough to understand each other better than we did at the end. He paused. We don't talk now. But it didn't end with hatred. It ended with two people who had failed each other in different ways, and were honest, finally, about the specifics. Do you have children? No, said simply, without elaboration, but she heard something in it, not grief exactly, more like the absence of something expected that had not arrived. Do you want them? She asked, and then immediately, sorry. That's too direct. I asked you if you still loved your ex-husband, he said. We've established that direct questions are on the table. She almost smiled. Fair, I don't know, he said. I thought I did. Then the marriage ended, and that particular future ended with it, and I stopped thinking about it as something I was working toward a pause. And then I sat on the floor at Maya's apartment and held Lily while she tried to eat my collar, and I don't know. Things feel different than they did. Clara was quiet. She didn't know what to do with that, not in a bad way, just in the way of something that was real and needed careful handling. I'm not a package deal, she said carefully. I mean, I am, practically speaking, they come with me. But I don't need you to want to be their parent. That's not what I'm looking for. I know that, he said. I'm not telling you that to make a claim. I'm telling you because you asked me an honest question, and I'm trying to answer it honestly. Okay, she said. Thank you. Yeah. The silence that followed was comfortable in the way that silences between people who have said something real are sometimes comfortable, not empty, just resting. I'm going to talk to Vanessa, Clara said. He didn't sound surprised. Okay, not because I owe her anything, because I need to stop wondering what she would say. That makes sense. Catherine is going to hate it. Catherine gets paid to manage the legal risk, he said. She doesn't get paid to manage what you need. I'm going to set conditions, Clara said. Public place, neutral, 30 minutes maximum. No legal topics. If she starts making excuses, I'm walking out. That sounds right. I'll call Catherine in the morning. Catherine did, in fact, hate it. She expressed this opinion with professional control, which meant she said, I strongly advise against this, Clara. And then, when Clara held her position, said, if you're going to do it regardless, then these are the parameters we need, and spent 10 minutes laying out exactly what Clara could and could not discuss without risk to the ongoing proceedings. Clara took notes. She followed them. She texted the unknown number, Vanessa's number, the next morning. I'm willing to talk. Once. Birdwing coffee Saturday at 10. 30 minutes. Vanessa responded in 4 minutes. Thank you. I'll be there. Saturday arrived gray and cold. The first genuinely cold day of December. The kind that made the city feel like it was pulling inward. Clara dropped the twins with Maya at 9:30. Maya had not said much about the decision after that first phone call, which was how Maya communicated significant disagreement once she understood that her disagreement wasn't going to change anything, and drove to Birdwing and got there 8 minutes early and ordered a cortado and sat at the corner table she always sat at and waited. Vanessa walked in at 2 minutes past 10. She looked different than Clara had expected, which was its own information. Clara had formed an image from the photos on Ethan's Instagram, composed, glossy, the careful presentation of a woman in her mid-30s who understood how to be looked at. The woman who walked into Birdwing on a cold Saturday morning, scanning the room until she found Clara, looked like the version of a person who had not slept particularly well and had decided to show up anyway. She was wearing a coat Clara didn't recognize, her hair down, no visible jewelry except a ring on her left hand that Clara deliberately did not look at directly. She was prettier in person than in photographs, which was unusual and meant, Clara thought, that she was someone whose aliveness translated poorly to a still image. She moved differently than Clara had imagined, less assured, or assurance that was working harder than it looked. She sat down across from Clara and said, "Thank you for coming," and her voice was lower than Clara had expected. "You have 30 minutes," Clara said, not unkindly, just as a fact. Vanessa nodded. She looked at her hands on the table, then back up. "I don't have a good way to start this. Start wherever you need to." A beat. Then, I knew he was married. I want to say that first because I think everything else has to start from that. I knew from the beginning. He didn't tell me you were pregnant right away, but I knew about the marriage. Clara said nothing. She had known this. Knowing something and having someone say it directly to your face were different experiences, but she had prepared for the difference, and she held it without reacting. "I told myself things," Vanessa said, "that marriages that were really working didn't leave room for someone else. That if it was happening, it meant something was already over between the two of you. That I wasn't the cause of something, I was just present for something that was already ending." She stopped. "I know how that sounds." "Keep going," Clara said. "I believed it when I was inside it, I really did. I don't know if that makes it better or worse." She looked at Clara directly. Her eyes were dark and steady, and she had, Clara noticed, the particular quality of someone who had been rehearsing this conversation for a long time. Not in a calculated way, in the way of someone who has been carrying something they needed to put down somewhere. When he ended it, in the hospital parking lot, a pause. "He told me about Lily, about the NICU, and she stopped again." "You what?" Clara said. "I didn't handle it well," Vanessa said quietly. "He was telling me his daughter was in an incubator, and I was saying things I'm not proud of. Because I was scared and angry, and I'd spent a year building something I thought was real, and it was being taken from me, and I didn't," she exhaled. "I didn't think about you, or about them. I was only thinking about myself, and I knew that about myself after, and I hated knowing it." Clara looked at her. This was not, she thought, a performance. It was too imperfect for performance. Vanessa had not found the words she wanted, had stopped and restarted, had not constructed a narrative that absolved her. She was just telling a story with herself, as someone who had done something that had cost other people real things, and who had arrived, apparently, at a version of herself that needed to say so. "Why now?" Clara said. "Because I'm going to marry him," Vanessa said. "And I couldn't do that without saying this to you first. I know that probably sounds... It sounds like you needed to do it for yourself," Clara said. "Which is fine. Just be honest about that part." Vanessa looked at her for a moment, and something shifted in her expression, a small loosening, like a thing that had been held against wind, finally allowed to settle. "Yes," she said, "partly. But I have a younger sister. She's 28. If someone had done to her what I did to you, I would want them to have to say it out loud. I would want them to not get to just move forward with no accounting." She looked at her hands. "This is the accounting, even if you don't want it." Clara sat with that for a moment. The coffee shop was filling up around them, Saturday morning traffic. The sound of orders being called, someone's child making noise near the front window. Ordinary life, proceeding. "I don't forgive you," Clara said. "I want to be clear about that. I'm not saying it to be cruel. I'm not there. I might not get there. What you did had real consequences that I'm still inside of. My daughter spent the first weeks of her life attached to machines, and I sat in a vinyl chair and didn't sleep, and you were part of the chain of events that led to me being alone in that room." She kept her voice level. "I'm not attributing Lily's condition to you. That was medical, not moral. But the context, the situation I was in, the stress, the upheaval that was partly constructed by choices you made." Vanessa did not look away. "I know," she said, "I know that." "Okay," Clara picked up her cortado. "Is there anything else?" Vanessa hesitated. "The twins," she said. "If Ethan and I, when we're married, they'll be around me. I want you to know that I take that seriously. That I understand what I represent to you, and I'm not going to pretend otherwise with them. I'm not trying to be there." She stopped. "I just want to do right by them. Whatever that means to you." Clara looked at her for a long time. This was the complicated part. This was the part that did not fit into a clean narrative of the woman who had been wronged and the woman who had done the wrong. Because the woman who had done the wrong was going to be, functionally, a part of her children's lives for years, and the quality of that presence mattered in ways that had nothing to do with what Clara felt about Vanessa Cole personally. "The terms of the custody arrangement are established by the court," Clara said carefully. "How you conduct yourself during Ethan's visitation is going to be visible over time. Not to me directly, but to my children, who will grow up with memories and impressions. That's the only accounting I actually care about." Vanessa nodded slowly. "Okay," she said. And if you hurt them not deliberately, not as a plan, but through carelessness or selfishness or any version of the kind of thinking that tells you your needs are more important than the people around you, I will address it through every legal mechanism available to me, and I will not be polite about it. I understand. Good. Clara set down her cup. Then I think we're done. She left first. She walked out into the December cold and stood on the sidewalk for a moment, not quite ready to get into the car. The air was sharp and clean, and she could see her breath, small clouds of it, dissolving almost immediately. She felt strange. Not better, not worse, just different in a way she didn't have vocabulary for yet. She called Catherine from the car. I just finished. How was it? She apologized, partially for herself, partially genuine. She said she knew about the marriage from the beginning. She said she was aware of what she'll represent to the twins and that she takes it seriously. A pause. Did anything said compromise the custody arrangement? No. I was careful. Okay. Catherine's voice softened a fraction, which was as close as she generally got to the personal register. Are you all right? I don't know yet, Clara said. I'll let you know when I figure it out. She went back to Maya's. The twins were in the middle of a tummy time session on the play mat, Noah tolerating it with grim resignation, Lily having achieved a level of headlift that Maya was documenting with her phone like a journalist on assignment. Clara sat on the floor next to them and put her hand on Lily's back and felt the small, working effort of her, the specific aliveness of her, and thought, this is what I came back to. This is what was always here. Maya glanced at her over the phone screen. Well, she said what she needed to say. And I said what I needed to say back. Clara looked at Lily, who had just managed to push up higher and was staring at the fabric triangle hanging from the play gym with the fixed concentration of someone who had decided this particular object was important. It's not resolved, it's just said. Maya lowered her phone. Does that help? I think so. I'll know more in a few days. She texted Daniel that afternoon. While the twins napped and Maya made noise in the kitchen, I talked to her. He called, not texted. How are you feeling? Like I opened something that I'm going to be processing for a while. That sounds right. She's not a monster, Clara said. I don't mean that as a defense of anything she did. She's a person who made choices that hurt me, and she's going to have to live with knowing that. That's its own thing. Yeah, he said, it is. Ethan called me this afternoon, she said. She hadn't planned to lead with it, but there it was. Daniel was quiet for a beat. What did he say? That Vanessa told him she reached out to me. That he didn't know in advance, and he wasn't sure how he felt about it. Clara shifted the phone to her other ear. He sounded off. Not angry, just uncertain, which is not a word I'd usually use for Ethan. What did you say to him? That it was between me and Vanessa, and that the only thing I needed from him going forward was adherence to the custody arrangement. She paused. He said, is it enough, the arrangement? Is it enough for you? And I said, yes. And he said, okay. Do you think he meant more by the question? Clara thought about that. I think he was asking if I was okay, she said. Not in the way where he's hoping I'm not. I don't think there's a part of him that wants me to suffer. I think there's a part of him that needs to know I survived intact. For his own, I don't know. His own accounting. And are you intact? She looked at the window. Outside, December had settled fully over the street. The light was gray and thin, the kind that made everything look like a photograph of itself. Intact, Clara repeated, answering Daniel's question from earlier that evening, the one she had let sit in the air unanswered while she watched the December light go flat outside the window. Yeah, I think so. Not undamaged. There's a difference, he said. A big one. She had been sitting with the distinction for months without quite having the language for it, and hearing it said that simply made something settle. Undamaged was a category she had exited the night she stood in her kitchen and read those emails. Intact was something else, something more durable and honestly more useful, because it did not require pretending that nothing had happened, only that the person who had been through it was still fundamentally herself on the other side. She was still herself. She knew that now in a way she hadn't been sure of in the worst weeks. The version of her that had sat in the NICU next to Lily's incubator at 3 a.m, not knowing, running on hospital coffee, and something that was mostly fear, that version had still been recognizably Clara. Still making practical decisions. Still noticing what was real and what was performance. Still, underneath all of it, holding on to some core thing that did not dissolve under pressure. That was not nothing. That was in fact everything. I'm going to sleep, she told Daniel. Long day. Yeah, call me tomorrow. I will. She put the phone down and sat in the quiet for a little while longer. And then she checked on the twins, and then she went to bed and slept, for the first time in a while, without waking at 2 in the morning to lie in the dark and think. December moved through the apartment in small increments, the particular smell of cold air coming under doors, the twins developing new skills at a rate that still startled her, Noah pulling himself up on the edge of the coffee table with the determined expression of a person who had decided that standing was going to happen today, whether his body was ready or not. Lily, who had spent her first weeks fighting for air in an incubator, was now rolling across the playmat with a purposefulness that made the pediatrician smile in the particular way that medical professionals smiled when they were genuinely pleased and not just performing optimism. "She's making up for lost time," Dr. Holt said at the 8-month checkup, which was the checkup Clara had been waiting for, the one that would tell them where Lily stood against the developmental markers they'd been watching since the NICU. She looked at the chart, looked at Lily, looked at the chart again. "Everything is trending correctly. I want to see her again at 10 months, but I'm not concerned, Clara." Clara sat with those 3 words, "I'm not concerned," and felt them move through her in a way that 3 words rarely did. She had been waiting for them since the first night in the hospital, the night she'd been told there was a problem, the night the floor had dropped. She cried in the parking garage outside the pediatrician's office. Not heavily, not a breakdown, just the specific release of something that had been held under pressure for 8 months, finally finding an exit. She sat in the driver's seat with the twins in their car seats behind her and let it happen for about 4 minutes, and then she blew her nose on a Wendy's napkin she found in the glove compartment and drove home. She called her mother from the driveway. Her mother, Sandra, who had driven to Jackson twice during the worst of the NICU stretch, and who had spent 3 days sleeping on Maya's couch and never once said, "I told you so" about Ethan, which was a level of restraint Clara had been deeply grateful for and planned to acknowledge properly at some point when she was less exhausted. "Dr. Holt says she's not concerned," Clara said, and Sandra started crying on her end of the phone before Clara had finished the sentence. They talked for 20 minutes. Sandra asked about Noah, about Maya, about the custody arrangement, about work. She asked about Daniel in the careful, neutral tone she had been using since Clara first mentioned him, not disapproval, not eagerness, just the particular carefulness of a mother who had watched her daughter survive something significant and was not interested in rushing anything. "He's good," Clara said, which was both the simplest and most accurate thing she could say. "Is he kind?" Sandra asked. Clara thought about it. "Yes," she said, "in the ways that count. Not he's not easy or uncomplicated, but he's kind. That's what matters," Sandra said. Clara was not sure that was entirely true kindness mattered, but it was not sufficient on its own, and she had loved someone who was, in many ways, genuinely kind and had still been betrayed. But she understood what her mother meant by it, the particular quality of kindness Sandra was identifying, and by that measure, yes, he was. The formal divorce settlement was finalized on a Thursday in mid-December, 17 days before Christmas, in a document that Catherine sent electronically and that Clara signed on her laptop at her kitchen table while the twins were down for their afternoon nap, and the apartment was so quiet she could hear the refrigerator humming. She had expected it to feel like more. She had expected some kind of weight, or finality, or the concrete sensation of a door closing. What she felt instead was something closer to administrative relief, like completing a form that had been pending for too long. The marriage had ended emotionally on the night she found the emails. Everything since had been process necessary, consequential process, but process nonetheless. The document was just the process finishing. She texted Catherine, signed and sent. Catherine replied, "Received." Congratulations is probably not the right word. Clara almost smiled. "No, but thank you." She sat at the kitchen table for a while after, not doing anything, just sitting. She thought about the night she'd moved into Maya's spare room, 7 months pregnant, 1 bag, the specific quality of being so tired that grief becomes indistinguishable from exhaustion. She thought about Ethan standing at Maya's door the next day, asking to come in, and Maya's voice through the intercom, "She's not ready. When she is, she'll tell you." She thought about the hospital, the C-section, the recovery room, the moment they brought Lily to her for the first time, small and fierce and furious about being outside the incubator. She thought about all of the things she had survived that she had not known at the time she was capable of surviving. She got up. She made coffee. She started dinner. That was the thing nobody told you about endings, that they mostly looked like ordinary afternoons. That the landmark moments of your life happened while the refrigerator hummed, and the pasta boiled, and the babies slept, and the world continued with its absolute indifference to your personal chronology. She had stopped needing it to feel significant. That, too, was a kind of freedom. Daniel came for dinner that Friday. Not to celebrate anything she hadn't told him. The settlement was finalized until the next day, by text, because she had needed the night to let it be hers first, but because it was Friday, and they'd been doing Friday dinners for a month now, a quiet routine that had accumulated without either of them formally deciding on it. He brought wine and the particular focaccia from a bakery near his building that she had mentioned weeks ago that she liked. He remembered things. She kept coming back to this. Not in a performed way, not as strategy, he just retained what she said, gave it weight, acted on it without making a production of doing so. She noticed it every time and tried not to attach too much to it, because she was still learning the difference between what was consistent character and what was the first impression behavior of someone who was still presenting their best self. The two looked identical from the outside in the early months. The only way to know was time, but she was paying attention. And what she kept seeing, over and over, was the same thing. Maya made herself scarce after dinner she had developed. Clara noticed a tactical busyness that appeared on Friday evenings with suspicious reliability, involving either a phone call in her room or a very important errand that required exactly the right amount of time for the apartment to feel like it belonged to Clara alone. Clara appreciated it without saying so, because saying so would embarrass both of them. They sat on the couch after the twins went down, the wine half finished, the focaccia demolished, the television on something neither of them was really watching. She had her feet tucked under her, and he had his arm along the back of the couch, not quite touching her, but close. The particular proximity of two people who were working out the geometry of each other without making it formal. The settlement was finalized yesterday, she said. He turned to look at her. How do you feel? Like I completed a very long administrative task. She looked at the ceiling. And like I'm free, in a way I don't quite have the vocabulary for yet. You'll find it. Maybe. She looked at him. I've been thinking about something you said. About being in this because you want to be, not because you're waiting for me to be ready for something more. He waited. He was good at waiting. I think I'm ready for something more, she said. I don't mean I want to rush anything, or that I have a specific timeline in mind. I just mean I'm not holding back anymore. Whatever this is, I'm in it. Actually in it. Not partially. He looked at her for a moment, and something in his face shifted not dramatically. Just a loosening of something that had been carefully held. Okay, he said. That's all you have to say. What would you like me to say? She thought about it. Nothing, actually. I think that's the right response. He smiled, that real one, the unhurried one. I've been in it, he said. Since the coffee shop, if I'm honest. But I didn't want to say it until you were ready to hear it. That must have required restraint. Significant restraint, he agreed. She laughed, and it felt clean, the kind of laugh that comes from somewhere that has been recently cleared of obstruction. She didn't move closer to him, and he didn't push. They sat in the comfortable in-between of something that was figuring itself out at its own pace, and that was fine, and it was more than fine. It was actually the right speed for something that was going to be real, rather than just urgent. The custody arrangement, in the weeks following the settlement, settled into a workable rhythm that Clara had not let herself hope for too explicitly, because hope and expectation were different muscles, and she had learned to be careful with the second one. Ethan showed up when he was supposed to. He was good with the twins in the specific, physical way he had always been. He held them with the ease of someone for whom babies were not intimidating objects, talked to Noah in that low voice Clara remembered from pregnancy, gave Lily his finger to grab and let her yank it with great satisfaction. He loved them. That remained true. Vanessa was not present during visitation, which Catherine confirmed through Preston Webb was a mutual and voluntary arrangement until the formal parameters were established. Clara did not ask how that conversation had gone, or whether Vanessa had agreed to it willingly or been persuaded. She did not, as she had decided months ago, spend energy on the parts of Ethan's life she couldn't control and didn't need to. She had coffee with Ethan's sister, Andrea, in late December. This had not been planned. They ran into each other at a pharmacy, Andrea with her own infant on her hip, and they stood in the cold outside for 20 minutes, talking the way women with small children talked. comparing notes on sleep and feeding and the particular madness of the first year, and Clara thought, this person called me when Vanessa was at the visitation. This person thought to warn me. That mattered, and she wasn't going to let the divorce take it away if she could avoid it. How are you doing? Andrea asked the question underneath the question. Better than I was, Clara said. More myself. You look it, Andrea said. She hesitated for a moment, and Clara recognized the hesitation, the particular pause of someone deciding whether to say a thing or leave it alone. Ethan told me the settlement went through. Yes. He wasn't okay that day. He didn't say much, but he wasn't okay. She looked at Clara. I don't know if that matters to you. Clara thought about it honestly. It matters in the way that I don't want him to be suffering, she said. Not because of what he is to me anymore, because he's their father and they need him to be functional and present. She paused. That's not cold. It's just the truth, I know, Andrea said. I wanted you to know that he knows what he did. I think he does, Clara agreed. That's between him and himself. She drove home from the pharmacy and thought about what Vanessa had said in the coffee shop. This is the accounting. And what Clara had thought then, but not said, that accounting was not the same as settling. That understanding what had happened and forgiving it and moving past it were three completely different events on three completely different timelines, and no one got to tell her how fast to move through them. She was moving at her own speed. She had accepted that about herself. Some things had moved faster than she expected. The anger had shifted sooner than she'd predicted, had become something quieter and more manageable before she'd braced for that change. Other things were slower. There were still nights when she lay awake, not because she was in pain exactly, but because the past 2 years of her life demanded periodic review, demanded to be looked at again and sorted. The way you sorted a drawer full of things that had accumulated while you weren't paying attention. She had stopped being impatient with herself about it. The week before Christmas, Daniel's sister Miriam, the pregnant sister from the doctor's office waiting room, which felt like a different life, now delivered a healthy girl, 6 pounds 4 ounces, after a labor that took longer than anyone wanted but shorter than it could have. Daniel called Clara from the hospital hallway while Miriam was sleeping, his voice doing something she had not quite heard it do before, something quieter and more open than his usual register. She's beautiful, he said. She already has this very specific expression, like she's already skeptical about everything. Smart kid, Clara said. He laughed softly. Yeah, a pause. It hits you differently when it's someone you love. I didn't know that. Clara was quiet for a moment. She thought about Noah and Lily, about the first time she'd held them not immediately, because there had been procedures and monitoring and the necessary medical machinery between her and them, but the first real time, when they were hers to hold, and she could feel their weight and their heat and the specific impossible aliveness of them. It changes what you understand, she said, about what's important, about what's real. Yeah, he said, that's exactly it. She heard something in him in that conversation that she had not heard before, or had heard but now recognized differently, now that she was actually in it rather than half in, now that she had told him she wasn't holding back. It was the particular vulnerability of a person who was allowing themselves to feel something fully and was not trying to manage its size. She found it, she searched for the right word, and landed on this one. She found it trustworthy. Not perfect. Not solved. Trustworthy. She was learning the difference. Christmas was at Maya's, which had become, in the 8 months since Clara moved into the spare room, something that felt less like a temporary arrangement and more like a chosen life. Maya had decorated with the aggressive enthusiasm of someone who took holidays seriously, which meant the apartment smelled like pine, and the twins were dressed in outfits that had reindeer on them, and Maya had made the sweet potato dish that her grandmother had made and that Clara had been eating at Maya's family's table for 15 years. Clara's parents drove down and spent 2 nights. Her father played with Noah on the floor for approximately 3 hours with visible personal satisfaction. Her mother held Lily and talked to her in the particular soft voice she had apparently been saving for grandchildren, and Lily gazed at her grandmother with the serene concentration she gave to people who interested her. Daniel came for Christmas dinner. Clara had told her parents about him before they arrived, in a phone call that had been relatively brief, because her parents were people who understood that more information was not always more useful, and that some things needed to be lived before they could be explained. Her father shook his hand and asked about his work with the directness of a retired engineer who considered small talk an inefficiency. Her mother asked how he liked Jackson, He handled both with the easy steadiness she had come to rely on. After dinner, after her parents had retreated to the guest room, and Maya had fallen asleep on the couch with a movie on, he and Clara sat at the kitchen table with the last of the wine and the particular silence of a household that had been full all day and was now returning to itself. This was good, he said. It was. Your dad told me I seemed like a serious person. He said it with mild amusement. I think he meant it as a compliment. He absolutely did. He has no patience for people who aren't. She looked at him across the table. He also told my mother he liked you. She told me in the kitchen when we were getting dessert. Subtle. They're not subtle. They're just polite. He was quiet for a moment, looking at his glass, and she recognized the quality of the silence, something coming that he was figuring out how to say. She waited. I want to tell you something, he said, and I don't want you to feel like you have to respond to it immediately. Okay, I love you. He said it without fanfare, looking at her steadily across the table. I'm not saying it expecting anything. I'm saying it because it's true, and because I've been aware of it for a while, and it seemed dishonest to keep not saying it. Clara sat with it. She looked at him at this man she had met in a waiting room by accident, who had sat on the floor in his work clothes and played with her children, who had listened to her talk about court hearings and custody filings and a conversation with the woman who had helped break her marriage without once making it about himself, who remembered things and showed up and told the truth even when the truth was complicated. I know, she said. I've known for a little while. He waited. I'm not ready to say it back yet, she said. That's honest. I know what I feel, but I need it to be real when I say it, not reactive. Not because it's the moment. I know that, he said. That's why I said you didn't need to respond. When I say it, it'll be because I mean it completely. That's the only way I'd want it. She reached across the table and put her hand over his, and he turned his hand over and held hers, and they sat like that in the kitchen while the apartment slept around them, and the Christmas lights Maya had strung along the window cast everything in a warm, low light that made the room look like the inside of something worth keeping. This was not the ending she had planned. She had not planned anything past surviving, past the delivery, past the NICU, past the signatures and the court dates, and the particular gauntlet of rebuilding a life that someone else had participated in destroying. She had not let herself project past the immediate because the immediate had been so consuming, and because projection had started to feel, in the worst of it, like a luxury she couldn't afford. But here she was, on the other side of the immediate, and this was what it looked like: a kitchen table, a man's hand, Christmas lights, two babies sleeping in the room down the hall, strong and growing and entirely themselves, a best friend asleep on the couch, a job she was doing well, a self she recognized. She had not rebuilt herself from scratch. That was not how people worked, in her experience, and the people who claimed to have done it were usually describing something more modest and more honest, a rearrangement, a reclassification, a decision about which parts of yourself you were going to center and which you were going to carry, but not let steer. She was the same person she had been before the emails. She was also someone different. Both of those things were true. She had learned something in the past year that she suspected she would spend the rest of her life finding new applications for, that other people's choices about you were not, ultimately, the determining fact of your life. That Ethan's betrayal had been real and consequential and had altered the landscape of her life in ways she was still mapping, but it had not altered who she was. Who she was had been determined by older and deeper things than one man's infidelity, and it had been confirmed, in the fire of the worst year of her life, as something that held. She was not grateful for what had happened to her. That was too much to ask, and she was done asking too much of herself. But she was, and this was the honest word, the one she had arrived at through months of testing and rejecting easier versions. She was clear. Clear about herself. Clear about what she needed. Clear about the difference between love that endures and love that is merely familiar. Clear about what she was willing to offer and what she was not willing to accept. That clarity had cost her something real and significant. But it was hers. In January, the twins turned 9 months old. Noah took his first independent steps on a Sunday afternoon, 3 steps, wobbly and enormous, across the kitchen floor toward Clara, who was sitting cross-legged on the tile because she had read that being at floor level helped with the motivation, and then sat down hard on his diaper and looked up at her with an expression of complete vindication, as if the standing was something she had doubted, and he had just proven the point. She laughed so hard she cried. She called Daniel before she called her mother, which was how she knew, if she hadn't already known, where things actually stood. Lily took her first steps 2 weeks later, less dramatic than Noah's, more like a decision she had been quietly making for some time and had finally decided to execute. She simply stood up from the coffee table and walked 4 steps to the couch and sat down, and looked at Clara with the expression of a person who does not see what all the fuss is about. Ethan saw the videos Clara sent them, because he was their father, and he deserved to be part of the moments even when the moments happened on her time, and he texted back, "She is exactly like you, Clara." And she almost wrote back, "I know," and then decided to just send a heart and leave it there. Because it was enough. Because the relationship between them was not going to be close, and it was not going to be easy, and it was going to require maintenance and intention, and the ongoing discipline of keeping the children's needs in front of her own. Feelings every time those feelings crowded forward. But it was functional. It was two people who had failed each other finding a way to show up, consistently and on purpose. For the two people they had both done right by. Two small, fierce, growing children who deserved parents who could be in the same room without making the air heavy. That was not nothing. That was a specific and daily achievement, and she had decided to count it as one. Spring arrived the way it always did in Jackson, tentatively at first, in the softening of the light and a week of rain that came in warm rather than cold, and then all at once, the trees on her street putting out leaves overnight, as if they had simply been waiting for permission. She started taking the twins to Fenwick Park on weekend mornings, the same park where Ethan had seen her and Daniel for the first time, where the whole social machinery of that autumn had briefly seized and reconfigured. It was just a park now. It had been returned to its ordinary self. Daniel bought a house in Jackson in April. He told her about it on a Thursday, over coffee at Birdwing, their place, the coffee shop where he had first sat down across from her uninvited with tea and an honest explanation of himself, with the particular care of someone who wanted to be clear that this was his decision, made for his own reasons, and not a pressure or an expectation. "The lease on my apartment was up," he said, "and I like it here. The investment work has been productive, and I'm not planning to wrap it up anytime soon." And he paused. "I wanted to stay. That's the real reason." She looked at him across the small table. "You wanted to stay," she repeated. "Yeah, because of your work." "Partly." She looked at him for a long moment and then nodded. Once, slowly, and something that had been quietly building for months completed a form she recognized. "Okay," she said. "Okay," he repeated. That afternoon, when she picked up the twins from Maya's and came home and was putting Noah down for his nap, she stood at his crib for a moment and looked at him round-faced and already half asleep, one arm flung out, the small perfection of his breathing, and said, quietly, to no one, to herself, to the room, to whatever this ordinary moment deserved, "I am so glad we're here." She called Daniel that evening. "I need to say something," she said. "Okay. I love you." She said it simply, the way she had promised herself she would, not as a response to something, not in a charged moment, just as a truth she was ready to carry out loud. "I've known it for a while. I'm ready to say it now." He was quiet for a moment, that good quiet, the settling kind. "I know," he said. "Don't be smug about it. I'm not. I'm just—" His voice did the thing she had first heard in the hospital hallway when he talked about Miriam's daughter. "Open. I'm glad. Me too." She hung up and sat on the couch in the living room while Maya banged around in the kitchen, making something that smelled like garlic and good decisions, while the twins slept down the hall, while the evening light came through the windows at the angle it only came at in spring, when the trees had their new leaves and the whole world had that quality of just washed. And she thought, this is my life. Not the life she had planned. Not the one she had expected to be living at 34, or the one she would have chosen if she'd been given the choices cleanly in advance. But hers, built from her own decisions, the ones that had been made for her, the wreckage of the ones made by someone else, the slow and imperfect architecture of everything she had chosen to keep and everything she had decided to put down. Real lives did not look like plans. They looked like accumulated choices, most of them small, made under conditions you had not anticipated, by a person who was still figuring out who they were while the figuring was happening. She understood that now in her body, not just her mind, there was a difference. The story she had been told about herself, about her marriage, about what she deserved, and what she had failed to hold on to, that story belonged to someone else now. It had been authored in bad faith, by a man who had not been who she thought he was, in circumstances she had not been given the full truth of. She had spent too long trying to make sense of it on its own terms. She was done with its terms. Her life had its own terms. They were harder and less certain and more complicated, and also she was sure of this, as sure as she had been of anything in years more honest than anything she had lived before. She was not finished becoming whatever she was becoming. Neither were her children, or Daniel or Maya, or Ethan, or Vanessa, or any of the other imperfect and trying and occasionally terrible people who constituted the world she actually lived in. Nobody was finished. That was not a failure. That was just the fact of being a person. What mattered was the direction. She was pointed somewhere she recognized. And, for the first time in longer than she could cleanly remember, she was not afraid of arriving. She told Maya that night, after dinner, after the dishes were done, and the twins were settled, and the apartment had reached its particular late evening equilibrium. Maya was on the couch with her legs tucked under her, and a cup of tea she kept forgetting to drink, and Clara sat in the armchair across from her and said, without preamble, "I told him I love him." Maya looked up. Her expression did something complicated, not surprise exactly, because Maya had not been surprised by anything related to Daniel since approximately October, but something more layered than simple happiness. The particular look of a person who has been watching something develop for months and is feeling the accumulated weight of all those months arriving at once. "What did he say?" Maya asked. "He said he knew." Maya stared at her. Then she laughed a single genuine burst of it. "Of course he did. Right? And he said he was glad." Clara pulled her knees up. That was it. It was not a dramatic conversation. It was very short. The important ones usually are, Maya said. Clara thought about that. It was true in her experience. The conversations that had actually changed the shape of her life had rarely been the long ones. The long ones were often about convincing. The short ones were about arriving somewhere both people had already been heading. Maya looked at her with the expression she wore when she was going to say something she had been sitting on. "Can I tell you something? When has that question ever stopped you?" "I was scared," Maya said, "when you first started talking about him. Not because of who he was, I didn't know who he was yet, but because of where you were. You had just come through the worst thing, and you were so tired. And I was watching you hold yourself together with both hands, and I thought," she paused, "I thought that if this went wrong, there wouldn't be much left to hold on to." Clara looked at her. "I didn't know you felt that way. I didn't want you to. You had enough to carry." Maya picked up her tea, held it without drinking. "But I was watching. Every time. Every dinner you came back from, every phone call, every time he was in this apartment. I was watching what he did and what he didn't do. And he never made it about himself," Maya said simply. "He never needed you to perform anything for him. He just showed up and let things be what they were." She set the tea down again. "Do you know how rare that is? In a man, specifically, in that specific situation, with a woman who has 2 babies and a legal battle and an ex-husband with a new fiancé, most men would have either disappeared or tried to be the hero. He just stayed, quietly." Clara felt the truth of that. She had noticed it herself, in pieces, over months, the absence of performance, the lack of agenda. But hearing Maya name it made it more concrete, more real, the way things witnessed by more than one person become more verifiably true. "He's not perfect," Clara said. "His marriage failed because he wasn't present. He made decisions alone that should have been shared. He has real limitations, I know," Maya said. "I'm not saying he's perfect. I'm saying he's trying to be different than he was. And trying is visible if you watch for it." Clara nodded. She had been watching for it. Specifically, deliberately, with the particular attention of a woman who had learned that the distance between what a person presented and what they were required constant calibration. What she kept finding when she looked was consistency. Not perfection, consistency. The same person showing up in different circumstances and behaving according to the same set of values she had identified early and watched hold under pressure. That was what she had wanted to be sure of. She was sure of it now. "Thank you," Clara said, "for watching, for not telling me what to do." "I almost told you what to do approximately 40 times, Maya said. "I deserve significant credit for my restraint." "You do," Clara agreed. "I'll acknowledge it formally at some point. A plaque would be appropriate." Clara laughed, and the sound of it filled the apartment in the comfortable way that sound did in a space where it was allowed to be ordinary. She thought, going to bed that night, about the version of herself from 14 months ago. The woman standing in the kitchen with her phone in her hand, reading words that were not meant for her, 7 months pregnant, the floor dropping. She thought about that woman with a specific and deliberate compassion that she had been working toward, not pity, not distance, but the kind of care you extend to someone who went through something hard and came out different and deserved to have that acknowledged. That woman had not known she was going to be okay. That was the true thing. She had not known it. She had hoped and she had functioned, and she had made one small decision after another: call Catherine, sign the papers, go to the hearing, eat the pasta, text Daniel back, sit on the floor and let Lily grab her collar, and the small decisions had accumulated into something she could recognize as a life. Not the life she had planned. A better one. Actually not easier, not cleaner, but more honestly hers. She had not been saved by anyone. She wanted to be clear about that, at least to herself. Daniel had not rescued her. Maya had not rescued her. Her parents, Catherine, the pediatrician who said, "I'm not concerned," none of them had done the central thing. The central thing had been done by Clara herself, in increments, often unglamorously, sometimes while eating boxed pasta and watching her tea go cold. She had simply refused, over and over, to stop moving forward. It was not heroic, it was just persistent, dogged. Human. That was the thing she had learned that she thought was worth keeping, that survival was not a dramatic event. It was a practice. It was the choice you made every morning to get up and feed your children and answer your emails and not let the worst thing that happened to you become the organizing principle of your existence. It was unglamorous, and it was slow, and it was ultimately the only thing that actually worked. She was passing it on without knowing how. She could see it already in the twins, in Noah's vindicated expression after those first 3 steps, in Lily's calm decisiveness, the way she had simply stood up and walked as if she had assessed the situation and determined it was time. They were learning, from her, what it looked like to keep moving. She did not need to teach it to them explicitly. She only needed to do it. That was enough. That was in fact everything. Spring deepened into itself. Daniel's house, a narrow 2-story on a quiet street 10 minutes from Maya's building, was still full of boxes in May, because he had moved in and immediately started a work project that was consuming most of his attention, and the boxes were the thing that gave way. Clara and Maya and the twins went over on a Saturday with takeout and a conviction that at least the kitchen should be functional. And they spent 3 hours unpacking while Noah sat in a bouncy seat and watched with deep sociological interest, and Lily figured out how to pull herself up on one of the lower boxes and then knocked it over with the expression of someone who has learned an important lesson and is filing it. Daniel handed Maya a box of kitchen things to sort through, and she looked at him over it and said, "You know she's going to make sure these are organized correctly," meaning Clara, and he said, "I'm counting on it." And Maya looked at him for a moment and then nodded, once, in a way that Clara noticed and chose not to comment on. He was being accepted, carefully on Maya's own terms, according to Maya's own timeline. That mattered more than Clara had expected it to. Maya had been there for everything, for the worst of it, and the grinding middle of it, and the slow, cautious emergence from it, and Maya's assessment of a person was not something Clara had ever been inclined to discount. Ethan brought the twins back on a Sunday in late May, his rotation, a full weekend, and stood in the doorway of Maya's building, in the early evening light, with Lily on his hip, and Noah toddling beside him, holding his hand, and he looked at Clara and said, "They were great." Lily learned a new word this weekend. Which one? More. He said it with a smile that was genuine and uncomplicated, the smile of a father who was proud of his daughter, and was not in this moment thinking about anything else. She said it approximately 200 times. She has strong opinions about crackers. That tracks, Clara said. She took Lily, who immediately grabbed her hair. "Thank you, Ethan." "Yeah." He handed over the diaper bag. He looked at her for a moment, the particular look of someone who has something to say and is deciding whether this is the occasion. She waited. "You look good, Clara," like settled. "You look settled." She thought about the word. Settled. Not finished, not resolved, not healed in the clean linear way that stories like to describe. Settled as in the way a house settled, the way good things found their level, the way the truth of a situation eventually made itself visible, regardless of how long it had been obscured. "I am," she said, "getting there." He nodded. He said goodbye to the twins, kissed Lily on the top of her head, ruffled Noah's hair, and walked back to his car. She watched him go and felt nothing complicated, just the simple observation of a man she had loved, and who had failed her, and who was the father of her children, and who was apparently making a life that had some version of stability in it. That was enough. She did not need more from that story. She turned and went inside. Noah was already at the elevator button, pressing it with the focused intention of someone who had a job to do. "Good work," she told him, and he beamed. She would tell the twins, when they were old enough to understand it, the version of the truth that was honest without being a burden. Not everything, they did not need every detail. That was not love. That was transfer of weight, but the essential shape of it. That their family had changed. That change was painful and also survivable. That the people who loved them had made mistakes, and had also, in the important moments, shown up. That the world was full of imperfect people doing their imperfect best, and that the work of a life was learning which imperfections you could live with and which you couldn't, and having the courage to act on the difference. That was the lesson. The whole of it, really. And she was still learning it herself, which was the most human thing about any of it, that you were always teaching what you were still practicing, always arriving at the thing you had been walking toward, never quite all the way there, just further along than you were yesterday. The elevator opened. She carried Lily in. Noah toddled beside her, holding the hem of her jacket. The doors closed. She was still moving forward.